There's Stieglitz. So before they had their falling out, he had actually photographed him in the gallery. Stieglitz you can always recognize with that big bushy white mustache he had. And so I need to see if I can find this. One of my photography friends from out east sent me a picture of this guy when he was like in his early 20s, and he kind of had longish hair, big fat mustache. I mean, it was just like, it looked like a big old leech or something on his face. I mean, it was just a monstrous, big old bushy thing. So I guess he always had a big bushy mustache. But anyway, Marlene Dietrich, another famous actress of the era. Look at the lighting. I mean, he was quite accomplished in the studio with almost like movie set lighting, very theatrical lighting that he was doing with his with these models. You do a Google search on Steichen, and this is one that almost always pops up of Gloria Swanson. And this would be a few of his more straightforward advertising shots, because he did produce ads. I've actually seen several of these. I was fortunate a few years ago when I was living in the Kansas City area that they had a whole exhibition of Steichen's work. Plus they had behind-the-scene movies that somebody had made of this guy's career. And so yeah, I've seen this photograph, and it was quite avant-garde in 1929 to do all the fancy mirrors and the reflections and things like that. And this I just found, to me this is quite abstract, was just matchsticks with some very extreme lighting, just kind of skimming right across the surface of all those books of matches and matches laid out. Just an abstract image, but you know, I guess this is part of his art, but I just find it really fascinating. Okay, and then there's a picture of, he's in here as an older man. I think that might be him there as an older man at the Family of Man installation there at the Museum of Modern Art. Okay, so we'll transition once again. There's a couple of transitions in today's lecture. Other people that had been influenced and were associated with Stieglitz started to pull away, especially after they came in touch with Paul Strand's work. Paul Strand did that real kind of straightforward, and that's where that term straight photography starts to come from. And these individuals, there were 6 of them. My 3 favorite are in red. Okay, actually, to tell you the truth, Willard Van Dyke and Sonia and John Paul, you can't hardly find any photographs that these people did. They were all part of this group called F64 group. And by the way, what that means, group F64, on the lens, you know, I've mentioned early on, we talked about the Iraqi mathematician that developed an aperture that could make different sizes and it would sharpen the image. Well, as that aperture gets smaller and bigger, those are called f-stops. And there's a number sequence. And when you get up to F64, it's a little bitty, tiny, tiny hole, but in the mechanics of a camera, it makes everything within the depth of the photograph look incredibly sharp. And so they adopted that as the name for their group because they wanted everything to be sharp focus, not like those pictorial pictures where things were soft and fuzzy and you could make out parts of it, but other parts you couldn't make out because it was kind of blurry. They wanted to definitely move away from that and render everything razor tack sharp throughout the photograph. So, hence F64. But the 3 prominent people that were the most prolific in producing images was Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, and Imogene Cunningham. All right, so we will look at some of their stuff. We'll start with Edward Weston. This is Weston in 1923. That's one of those, just a second ago with Steichen, I said that silhouette of that 8 by 10 inch view camera. There's one right there. So you can see it next to the size of a human. It's a pretty big camera to deal with. Not like our little cell phone cameras today, okay? All right, so Edward Weston was an interesting character. Some people say he's a horrible person. Other people find him quite interesting. I just love his work, okay? He was married to a very wealthy lady, lived out in California in the Los Angeles suburbs, and he had a portrait studio. And he found out about modernism, okay? And so he was visiting with Stieglitz. He was friends with Paul Strand. He knew Clarence White. He was associated with all these people. He would make trips from L.A. out to New York, and he would show Stieglitz his work, and Stieglitz would trash it, just tell him how horrible he was, and he would get Weston all mad and upset, and then Weston would go out and try other forms of photography and bring it back because he was trying to get Stieglitz's approval, okay? But regardless, he got totally sucked into the modernism movement with the straight photography. And like I said, he married into money. And he had 3 sons. I think he had 3 sons. And all of a sudden, one day, he just announced to his wife that he needed to go to Mexico and work on his fine art photography. And, oh, by the way, I'm taking my assistant, Tina Modotti, which was a very attractive Italian lady that was going to be his assistant. And, by the way, I need you to pay for all of this while I'm away. And, oh, by the way, I'm having an affair with Tina. And I still need you to keep paying me. And she did. This woman kept sending him money. And she refused. He tried to get a divorce, and she refused to give him a divorce. So he said, okay, I'm just going to live my life then. And eventually he ended up with every time he got infatuated with another woman to become his assistant or photograph her nude, they always became his assistant. They became his lovers. And you can read all about it in his day journals. They have published his diary. It's called the Day Books of Edward Weston. And it gets quite interesting to read about how he was making some of his most famous photographs, but also the issues going on in his personal life with either his lovers or his wife back in Los Angeles or whatever. Very interesting thing to read about. But regardless, Weston made some incredible, beautiful photographs, and that's where my interest lies, in the imagery that he made. While he was in Mexico, he got tied up with some Mexican artists, Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. I'm sure you've probably come across their names. Okay, very, very influential artist. Tina Modotti continued on. She remained behind in Mexico and got caught up in the art movement, but she was also communist, and part of the Mexican art movement had dealt with communism, and eventually she died under a very suspicious situation where she supposedly had a heart attack at 30-something, but somebody thinks that she was poisoned or something from the factions waging war over communism down in Mexico or something like that. Okay, so anyway, let's move on and look at some of his images. His White Dunes what you have to keep in mind is he photographed a variety of things. He photographed what we call still lifes, things on a table. He photographed the nude female form. He also photographed the male form. He photographed his children, his sons, nude all the time. You know, today, in today's society, you'd probably be in all kind of trouble for that. But he did it back then, and he exhibited, put these on display in galleries. Okay. So he photographed the human form, male and female, nude. He photographed landscapes, and he photographed still lifes. The interesting thing that I see in all of his work is this: there's a sensualness that starts to mimic the human body. Even in the landscape, there's things about the undulation of that starts to look like curves of human beings. And I see this even in, we're going to look at one of his most famous peppers, a pepper. And it looks sensual, like a human form. This guy just got, now this is not, to me it's not sensual. This one here is very rectangular and angular, but oftentimes his work takes on that quality. And he did do commercial work. And in his day books, he rants and raves about the idiots paying him to photograph cans of coffee, and that they have no sense of design and no sense of the art of photography. And he would just rail about them in his day book. Yet he did it so that he could still make some money, even though his estranged wife was still paying the bills for him. Weird setup. Cabbage. He kind of went through phases during his art career. Okay, for a long time he was photographing the sand dunes. For another period of time he was out in the deserts photographing ghost towns. Then he ended up doing all these vegetable still lifes. Then he was doing nudes. Then he ended up living in Carmel, California, right on the ocean. And so he started going to Point Lobos, California, and photographing the ocean and the way the water transitioned into the sand. He did a whole variety of things. Close-up of an artichoke cut in half. But there's the pepper. Pepper number 29. I mean 30. I always think about number 29. This was where he stopped, was at number 30. But I've seen others in this series, and for some reason I always get stuck on 29 in my head. But pepper number 30 is his most famous of peppers. Now, what was interesting about this, remember I said these guys like to play around with f64 to get maximum sharpness in their photographs. Well, the smaller you make that little diaphragm or that aperture in a lens, it requires a longer exposure to build up that light because it's a small amount of light passing through the lens. And so when he would do stuff like this he photographed on his front porch inside of a metal, it was either a metal funnel or a bucket. But you can actually see kind of the curvature down along the bottom of that, of the metal. Okay, so he's got this setting out on the porch and just the available light, and it was like a couple of hour exposure that it took to make that image. Well, he would do this with all kinds of fruits and vegetables. He was doing bananas for a while, and he would set up these bananas, and he would start his camera, and then he would walk away because he's not going to stand there for 2 hours with his camera while it's making these exposures, right? Well, his sons didn't know that Dad was making pictures of the bananas sitting there, and so the kids would come in and rip off some bananas or the peppers and go eat them and run about doing their childhood things there at the house, right? And then Dad would come back 2 hours later, and it's like, what happened? Everything's gone. And so when you read his day books, he'll talk about Cole and Kim, two of his sons. Those, and this is so funny, he would draw a line where the explicative would be. So instead of saying those damn kids, those blank kids got into my bananas again today. Those blank kids took my peppers. And so he would never spell out a cuss word or anything like that. He would just draw lines in his book. And so they published it that way. So when you go into the library and you pick up a copy of that book. It's just got these lines, blanks, and you fill in the blank of what he was thinking about his kids getting into his stuff. Okay. Nautilus, his light on his still lifes I just find just incredible. Some of his nudes, some of his more famous ones. And then we'll talk about Ansel Adams. And a lot of people have heard of Ansel Adams, even if they're not photographers or whatever. Ansel Adams is like one of those household common names. It's a very iconic name, yes, in American culture. So this is a picture of him when he was an elderly man. But, so we can see that he lived from 1902 to 1984. He was, I want to say he was from San Francisco, and as a child when they had one of those earthquakes and the big fires, he fell and broke his nose. That's why in the pictures of him, like there, he's got this really kind of big bent looking nose because it got broke as a child during the earthquake out there. His parents really pushed him to be a musician. He was a pianist. Matter of fact, I think he may have even performed semi-professionally as a pianist. And I always found that interesting in that once he finally shifted over completely to photography, and he was in the darkroom working, and everything has to be timed when you're in the darkroom. There's a certain amount of minutes that image has to be, the paper has to be in the developer, and then so many minutes in the fixer and the stop bath and on and on. What he would do, instead of having an actual timer, a little clock kind of timer that you turn and it counts down backwards, he had a metronome from his piano, and he would set it to a beat, and he counted the beat to the music in his head, and that's how he processed his film and his prints, based on the tick, tick, tick of a metronome. I always found that kind of eccentric. But anyway, regardless, he was a huge environmentalist. He wanted his landscape photography specifically to help preserve the environment. And since he was from Northern California, Yosemite National Park and the Sierra Nevada mountains was kind of where he concentrated his work on trying to preserve. And so he got involved with the Sierra Club. But he also did, and this one I find very ironic, he did commercial work for Kodak. This aspect that he developed the zone system, this was a very highly technical development process and a pre-visualization process for black and white film. And he visualized tone from white to black as a series of 10 steps from pure white to pure black with shades of gray in between. And he and this fellow named Fred Archer had devised this whole system that if they wanted to translate my beige jacket into number 7 gray, they had a whole elaborate system of how to expose the film, how to process it to make it come out a certain value. I've had a lot of friends that could teach zone system, that practice zone system. Not me. That one got way too complicated for me. My professor tried to teach that when I was in college, and it went over my head, and it kind of stayed over my head. I appreciate it. I love to look at images that have been developed with this process, and a couple of his images today, the depth of the black and white is just incredible. But it's just a little bit beyond me. Like, look at the range of values, the range of grays and whites, pure whites and blacks in that. And, it's kind of astounding. But it was all very scientific principle that he developed to express his art. Ah, that's nearby. It's right over at Grand Tetons, right? Yeah. Matter of fact, at the turnout off of the highway, they have this photograph laminated into a big laser-etched print marking the exact spot where Ansel Adams took this famous photograph. So, yours truly was over there this past summer, and I stood in the same spot. But look at the difference. Look at the... This is 1942. You see how you can see this whole bend of the river right here? When I took it, all those trees had grown up and you can't even see that bend anymore. So that's what happens in 60-year time frame, 70-year time frame, something like that. Trees really grew up, okay?